Do note that all information used and presented in this video is taken from the SDAS, otherwise known as the Benilde School of Deaf Education and Applied Studies. You've probably heard of the word deaf before. According to Merriam-Webster, it is a term that means having total or partial hearing loss, and also refers to people who have total or partial hearing loss. Sometimes, the capitalization of the word deaf changes depending on the context. Deaf with a lowercase d refers to the state of being unable to hear. Deaf with an uppercase d refers to the deaf as a community. While being deaf does indeed make their experience a bit different from that of the hearing, that shouldn't be what defines them as individuals. Deaf people have their own cultural identity separate from that of the hearing people. Being able to communicate with the deaf is more than just being able to sign or interpret signing, but also being aware of deaf culture. Much like how different countries around the world have different cultures, deaf culture also differs from country to country. For example, American deaf culture, which uses American Sign Language, is different from French deaf culture, which uses French Sign Language. This video specifically tackles Filipino deaf culture and Filipino Sign Language. So, here are some things to keep in mind when interacting with a deaf person. Part 1. Terminology. When it comes to terms to refer to the deaf, there are some do's and don'ts. Some of these terms you may have heard before, namely, mute, deaf mute, or pipe in Tagalog, deaf and dumb, handicapped, and hearing impaired. These are the don'ts when referring to the deaf community. These are terms that are outdated, offensive, or have negative connotations towards the deaf community. Firstly, one being deaf does not automatically mean that they are mute. Deaf people have a voice and they can use them at their discretion. Similarly, the term deaf and dumb is offensive because it is reductive and perpetuates the stereotype that deaf people are inherently dumb, which is not true. The term handicap implies an illness, injury, or condition that must be cured. Deafness is not an illness or an injury. It's simply how the deaf have existed ever since, and they do not need to be cured. Lastly, the term hearing impaired or the term impairment is similar to handicap. The term was actually a popular medical term in the 1970s. However, it has fallen out of favor since then. Like handicap, it is derogatory as it reduces deaf culture and language to simply an impairment, as if it's something that should be healed from. So, what are the terms that the deaf are okay with? Deaf or bingi. This is deaf with a small d. This is generally accepted as a term to refer to someone with hearing loss. Deaf with a capital D, meanwhile, refers to the deaf community as a whole. Lastly, the term hard of hearing, while in a similar vein and is accepted as a term, is a separate community from the deaf. They are somewhere in between the worlds of the deaf and the hearing and have their own identity as a community. Part 2. Nature and characteristics. Next, we will talk about some common characteristics about Filipino deaf culture. Understanding these allows us to better grasp the nuances when communicating with the Filipino deaf community. For this part, we'll keep it brief and give you 3 quick things to note about the deaf. 1. The deaf are very visual. Naturally, since they don't have a sense of hearing, they make up for it through their sense of sight. The deaf are very perceptive and have an increased visual awareness. 2. The deaf are very expressive. This is an extension of using FSL as their main form of communication. In order to get their points across, they sometimes like to use large, exaggerated movements and facial expressions when signing. 3. The deaf are very straightforward and direct. Because they are very visual people, one's appearance makes a big impact on them and often leaves them with big impressions. Sometimes they will be blunt and describe someone by their physical appearance, like this person is tall or this person is fat. While this might catch you off guard, do note that they do not mean this in a malicious or hurtful way. It's just their straightforward way of expressing themselves. Part 3. Interaction. When interacting with the deaf community, here are some things you can do in order to better get your point across, even if you don't understand FSL. Emphasize facial expressions and make large hand gestures when communicating. even when communicating through a proxy such as pen and paper, text, or an interpreter. This can be as simple as smiling while nodding your head if you agree, or putting extra emphasis on your gesture when you're pointing at something. It helps to get your point across. Remember to focus on the deaf person when communicating through an interpreter. While the interpreter may be the one talking, it is important to remember that he is only relaying the words of a deaf person. In essence, the interpreter is the translator, and you're really communicating with the deaf. And even eye contact should reflect that. Use vibrations or touch when calling attention. For example, a tap on the shoulder or a knock on the table. This one is a little self-explanatory, but if you need to call the attention of a deaf person, you can easily do that by gently touching their arm or shoulder. And finally, when communicating through text, try to use simpler or more commonly used words. There may be times where the deaf person does not immediately understand what you're trying to communicate to them. In this case, try to rephrase the statement and use words that are easier to understand. Avoid using words that are too specific or uncommon, as the deaf may not have encountered that word before, or there may not be an FSL equivalent. And lastly, stick to English. Despite being short for Filipino Sign Language, FSL has strong influence from ASL, and most deaf are taught English as their first language as it has simpler grammatical rules. This does not mean that deaf people cannot understand Filipino, but more so that they may not fully understand deeper Filipino words or grammar. Because of this, it is easier to communicate with them in English, as it is what they are more comfortable with. In essence, everything we've discussed in this video is really just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to understanding Filipino deaf culture. The deaf community of the Philippines is an often overlooked minority. However, we hope that by completing this video, it can give you a better understanding and appreciation of their culture and nature as people. For more information regarding Filipino deaf culture and FSL, feel free to check out the other videos in this website.